Welcome to Mr. Kelin's Stories. In today's heart-pounding tale, witness the transformation of an unexpected marriage, where a woman is forced into a billionaire's world. But what starts as control and obsession turns into a powerful story of love, healing, and redemption. This story will take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't want to miss. If you enjoy stories that captivate and leave you thinking long after the video ends, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories to life. Enjoy the journey. Cara Davis had always considered herself a simple girl, content with her life in New York City. Raised by her father, a kind and hard-working man, she had never been one to chase luxury or fame. Her father had worked tirelessly to provide her with an education and a stable life. Cara was proud of how far they had come together. She knew that despite the lack of wealth, her father's love and their small but warm apartment were enough to make her feel safe and loved. But everything changed when her father unexpectedly passed away. One evening, Cara returned from college, excited to see him after weeks of being apart. The phone call she received shattered her world into pieces. Her father, the one person who had always been her rock, was gone. Cara's heart sank into a pit of grief so deep that she couldn't breathe. She was now alone in the world. The grief was overwhelming, but even worse was the fact that her stepmother, Eleanor, suddenly became the one with control over Cara's life. Eleanor, a woman known for her beauty, elegance, and cold ambition, had always seemed distant. Despite her outward charm, Cara had never truly trusted her. Eleanor had always been focused on her own desires and dreams, and Cara had felt like an afterthought. But now, with Cara's father gone, Elena's hold on the family was complete. Eleanor was not content with just managing the house. She had far grander plans, and Cara soon realized that her stepmother had set her sights on something much bigger than a small family business. Elena had been secretly plotting to marry a powerful billionaire CEO, Ryan Hayes, a man who ruled industries and wielded enormous influence. But there was one problem. Ryan wasn't interested in Elena. He wanted Cara. The shock of hearing this truth made Cara feel as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. She couldn't fathom why a man like Ryan would want to marry her. She wasn't some glamorous woman from high society. She was a regular girl who had never dreamed of a life filled with luxury. But Eleanor, sensing an opportunity for a life of wealth and power, pushed Cara to accept the proposal. Elena made it clear, Cara had no choice. "Think about it," Elena insisted, her voice smooth and persuasive. "This is your chance to secure everything we've ever dreamed of. Ryan Hayes is a billionaire. He can give us a life of luxury. You'll be set for life." Cara felt suffocated by her stepmother's words. Her future, her happiness, was now in the hands of a man she had never met, and a stepmother who had always used her to achieve her own ambitions. With each passing day, Cara felt the walls closing in. Her father was gone, and the life she once knew was slipping away. The pressure was unbearable. Eleanor's constant persuasion made Cara feel as if she had no choice but to agree. "You'll do this for both of us," Eleanor continued. "It's the only way to move forward." Cara could barely breathe under the weight of it all. She was trapped in a situation she never asked for, being forced into a marriage with a man she didn't know, all to fulfill her stepmother's dream. Her heart twisted with the realization that she had lost control of her own life. Finally, the proposal came. It wasn't a romantic moment, filled with love and promises. Instead, it was a cold, calculated business arrangement. Ryan Hayes, sitting across from Cara in a luxurious restaurant, slid a diamond ring onto her finger. His eyes were distant, almost emotionless as he made his proposal. "Marry me, Cara. It's what's best for both of us." Kara sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words crashing over her like a tidal wave. She looked to Eleanor, who beamed with satisfaction, knowing her plan was falling into place. Kara's heart raced. She didn't want this, but what could she do? She had no power, no voice. She felt like a pawn being moved across a chessboard. With a deep breath, Kara nodded. It wasn't a promise, but a concession, a way to end the pressure that had been mounting on her. She felt sick to her stomach as she thought about what she was agreeing to. Her future was now bound to a man she didn't know, all because of a woman who saw her as a means to an end. As she left the restaurant that night, her mind swirled with fear and uncertainty. How had she gotten here? Was this really her life now? Was she really going to marry Ryan Hayes, a man who saw her not as a person, but as a transaction? Kara knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same. She was about to step into a world of wealth, power, and manipulation, none of which she had asked for. And as she walked through the streets of New York, the once vibrant city now felt like a cold, alien place. She felt utterly alone. The proposal wasn't just the start of a marriage. It was the beginning of a journey into a world where Kara would be forced to confront her deepest fears, discover her strength, and eventually challenge everything she thought she knew about love, control, and the price of ambition. Ryan Hayes was everything Kara had imagined, a man of incredible power, wealth, and success. As the CEO of a massive tech empire, Ryan had built an empire that spanned across the globe, creating innovations that had changed industries. His name was synonymous with success, his face featured in the most influential business magazines. At first glance, he seemed to have it all: luxury cars, sprawling estates, and a life most could only dream of. He exuded confidence, and his cold, calculating demeanor could make anyone believe he was invincible. But there was something more to Ryan that Kara couldn't quite place. It was as if there was a part of him locked away, a hidden layer beneath the polished exterior. When she looked into his eyes, there was a flicker of loneliness, something dark, something haunted. It wasn't the aloofness that came with wealth or power, it was something deeper. Ryan's detachment was not just a mask, it was a barrier, one that had been built over years of hardship and control. She couldn't help but be drawn to it. It was as if, despite all his wealth and success, Ryan was searching for something he couldn't find in the world he had created. Their wedding day was a blur for Kara. It had all the grandeur she had never dreamed of. A lavish ceremony with glimmering chandeliers, rows of guests adorned in elegant attire, and a reception that felt like something out of a fairy tale. But Kara couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the extravagance, she was nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. The grand hall was filled with applause, but it felt empty, as though the applause was for the spectacle, not for her as a person. She was merely an object in a carefully orchestrated deal. The weight of that realization sat heavily on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. After the ceremony, Ryan whisked her away to his penthouse, an architectural marvel that took Kara's breath away. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unmatched view of the city skyline, glittering with lights like 1,000 stars. But for all the opulence, the space felt cold and hollow. It was stunning, yes, but empty, emotionally barren. The walls that surrounded her weren't just made of glass and steel, they felt like walls between her and Ryan. She could tell that even here in the heart of luxury, Ryan was not at peace. Kara's mind raced as she stepped into this strange new world. The lavish apartment seemed to mock her discomfort, as if it had been designed to impress, but not to make her feel at home. There was no warmth in the space, no welcoming touch that made it feel like a home. Her heart pounded as she tried to find her bearings in this new life. She had agreed to marry Ryan, but the enormity of it all was starting to sink in. The life she was stepping into was foreign to her, and she didn't know if she was ready to navigate its intricacies. Dinner that evening was quiet, but it wasn't the usual awkwardness she had expected. Instead, something shifted between them. Ryan wasn't the distant, icy figure she had come to know from the wedding. He seemed softer, in a way. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, the conversation flowed unexpectedly easily. They spoke about their lives, about their pasts, things that at first felt like territory neither of them was willing to enter, but somewhere in the midst of their casual conversation, a bond formed. The air between them became charged with something neither of them had anticipated. Ryan's gaze lingered on her in a way that made Kara's heart skip a beat. The intensity in his eyes, once so detached, seemed to melt away the coldness that had surrounded him. For the first time, she saw something real in him, a vulnerability he had been hiding all this time. She could sense that there was more to Ryan than the billionaire CEO image he projected to the world. As they spoke, she could feel the invisible walls around him start to crumble. In a moment of honesty, Ryan shared something with her that she hadn't expected. He spoke of his past, his struggle with a controlling family, his desire to escape the expectations placed on him. He revealed how his rise to power had been marked by sacrifice, by a constant battle to assert his own identity in a world that demanded conformity. The cold businessman that Kara had seen earlier now seemed like a man who had fought tooth and nail for his place in the world, and it had left its scars. As he spoke, Kara's heart went out to him. She had always assumed that someone like Ryan had everything figured out, that he was impervious to the struggles that people like her faced. But hearing him open up about the pain he had endured made her realize that Ryan was human, after all. He had built an empire, but in the process, he had isolated himself from the very thing he needed most: connection. In that brief exchange, something shifted between them. Kara saw a side of Ryan that no one else could see, a side that yearned for something more than power and control. She wasn't sure if it was empathy or something else, but she felt a deep connection to him in that moment. It was as though they both understood what it felt like to be trapped by the expectations of the world around them, to have their lives dictated by forces beyond their control. But as quickly as it had come, that connection faded. Ryan's demeanor shifted back to the cold, calculating businessman she had married. His walls went back up, and the warmth he had shown vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Kara, feeling confused and conflicted, was left in the quiet aftermath of their conversation. What had just happened? Had that moment of vulnerability been real, or was it just a fleeting glimpse of something Ryan didn't want to face? As the evening came to a close, Kara realized that her life with Ryan was going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Beneath the cold, powerful billionaire persona lay a man who was struggling with his own demons. And in the midst of all that, there was something between them, a connection that neither of them fully understood, but that neither of them could deny. For the first time, Kara wondered if there was more to her marriage to Ryan than just a business transaction. Would they ever truly connect, or would they remain trapped in the roles they had been forced into? The morning after their wedding, Kara could feel the weight of everything that had changed. The previous night had been full of emotions she didn't quite understand, but now, in the cold light of day, something else lingered in the air. Ryan's behavior had shifted in a way that left her both confused and uncomfortable. What had been a polite but distant relationship before the wedding now seemed to have intensified. It was as though something in Ryan had shifted overnight, and now his every action was centered around her. Ryan couldn't seem to take his eyes off Kara. Whether she was walking around the house or simply sitting in one of the rooms, his gaze would follow her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. At first, Kara thought it was just a passing curiosity, a new wife, perhaps someone he was still getting used to. But the more she observed, the more she realized it was something more. He wasn't just watching her out of politeness or interest. There was an obsession in his eyes, a possessiveness that felt almost suffocating. It didn't stop there. Ryan's attempts to shower her with gifts were borderline overwhelming. Expensive jewelry, designer clothes, lavish trips to exotic destinations. They were all part of his attempt to win her over. Kara was no stranger to luxury, but the gifts felt empty, like he was trying to buy her affection rather than earn it. She couldn't help but feel like a pawn in a game she hadn't signed up for. Each extravagant gesture felt more like a demand, as though Ryan believed that material things could fill the emptiness that lingered between them. But it wasn't the gifts that Kara craved. She didn't want diamonds or five-star vacations. What she wanted was honesty, a real connection, and an understanding of why Ryan had changed so suddenly. Why, after all these years of running his empire with precision and control, had he become so fixated on her, the woman he had forced into marriage just days earlier? It didn't make sense, and the more she tried to make sense of it, the more confused and trapped she felt. As the days passed, Ryan's obsession deepened. He would appear unannounced in her part of the house, his presence seemingly always there, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. He would sit silently across from her during meals, his eyes never leaving her face. Even during times when she tried to relax or spend time with friends, Ryan seemed to find ways to intrude. Whether it was showing up unexpectedly, lingering in the background, or calling her with a question that could have waited, his need to control every aspect of her life became more apparent. At times, Ryan would try to hide it, showing up with a smile, trying to appear like the charming billionaire everyone believed him to be. But underneath that facade, Kara could feel his unease. His need for control was no longer subtle. It was as if he couldn't bear to let her out of his sight, like he was terrified she might slip away. The tension between them grew thick, like an invisible thread that bound them together in a way that felt more like a cage than a connection. There were moments, however, when Ryan would drop his guard, when he would do something sweet, something kind, that would remind Kara of the man she had once hoped he could be. He'd bring her breakfast in bed, or send her a note that wasn't just about business, but about how he was thinking of her. In those fleeting moments, Kara would see the man behind the obsession, the man who had vulnerabilities, who had emotions that weren't always masked by power and control. But as soon as those moments passed, Ryan would retreat back into himself, his obsession taking over once again. There were times when Kara could see the struggle within him, a battle between the man who wanted to control her and the man who was perhaps looking for something more than just a business arrangement. But those moments were always brief, overshadowed by his overpowering need to dictate every aspect of her life. Kara began to feel like she was losing herself. The woman who had walked into this marriage with hopes of finding a life of freedom and peace was now drowning in Ryan's demands. The house that was supposed to be her sanctuary had become a prison, and no matter where she went, Ryan was always there, watching, waiting, controlling. She began to wonder if she would ever have control over her own life again, or if she was forever doomed to be a mere accessory in his meticulously constructed world. The loneliness Kara had once felt had only intensified in the midst of Ryan's obsession. She no longer felt like the person she once was. She was a shell of herself, lost in a marriage that wasn't really hers. No matter how hard she tried to break free, Ryan's hold on her was suffocating, and with every passing day, she felt herself slipping further away from who she truly was. In this strange new life, Kara didn't know where she ended, and Ryan's obsession began. It was as if his world had swallowed hers whole, and now she was drowning in a sea of expectations and manipulations. Even when he tried to be kind, even when he tried to make her feel special, the underlying obsession made everything feel like a game, one she didn't want to play. The deeper she got into this marriage, the more she realized. The line between love and control was razor thin, and Ryan's obsession with her was threatening to tear them both apart. Kara was trapped, and the more she tried to understand him, the more she realized she was no longer sure of what she even wanted from him. Kara couldn't take it anymore. The suffocating grip Ryan had on her life, the overwhelming obsession, and the constant manipulation had driven her to the edge. Each day that passed felt like another layer of her identity was being chipped away, and she couldn't stand it. Her life had become a prison, gilded in gold and wealth, but a prison nonetheless. No amount of diamonds or lavish vacations could hide the fact that she had lost herself somewhere in the middle of all of this. That evening, the breaking point arrived. The argument had been brewing for days, ever since Ryan demanded that she cancel a meeting with her close friend, Claire. The simple act of spending time with someone outside their controlled world seemed to push him over the edge. "You're mine, Kara. You have no reason to spend time with anyone else," Ryan had said, his voice cold, yet underlined with something darker, an almost obsessive need to keep her tethered to him at all costs. That was the moment Kara snapped. She couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't smile and nod like everything was fine. She couldn't continue living in a gilded cage, trying to appease a man who treated her like a possession, not a person. She had always been someone who valued her independence, her freedom. But Ryan had systematically taken it all away. With a racing heart and trembling hands, Kara marched into the penthouse's grand living room, her mind set on the confrontation she had been dreading for so long. The space was as cold as ever, the floor-to-ceiling windows casting a shadow over her as she stepped into the room, where Ryan had been pacing like a caged animal. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling but unwavering, "I need to understand. Why are you doing this? Why do you act like you own me? You forced me into this marriage, but I'm not your possession. I'm a person with my own thoughts, my own dreams." The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Kara could feel the weight of them as they left her lips, as though they were the very truth that had been building up inside her for so long. She was finally saying what she had been too afraid to admit to herself, that this wasn't a marriage, it was a trap. She was a prisoner in a golden cage, and Ryan was the warden. Ryan froze in place, his eyes locking onto hers. He had been pacing with frustration, but now he was still, as if her words had struck him with a force he hadn't expected. His expression shifted, from one of defiance to one of confusion, and then regret. For the first time since their wedding, Kara saw him actually hear her. He sat down slowly, as if exhausted by the weight of his own actions. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of vulnerability and shame. For a brief moment, he didn't look like the powerful, controlling billionaire CEO. Instead, he looked like a man who was lost, a man who didn't know how to fix the broken pieces of his life. I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft and quieter than Kara had ever heard. "I thought if I could control everything, I'd find peace. But I'm lost, Kara. I don't know how to stop." The confession hung in the air between them like a storm cloud ready to burst. Kara's heart twisted with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and something she hadn't expected: sympathy. Ryan's words were raw, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the man who had tried to control every aspect of her life. She could hear the pain in his voice, the helplessness that followed him like a shadow. It was almost as if he had never learned how to live without control, without the need to dominate every situation around him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, as the weight of the moment settled over them both. Kara's heart was pounding, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had never expected this kind of honesty from Ryan. In that silence, she saw him for what he truly was, someone who had never been able to let go of the fear that had driven him to build his empire. A man who had convinced himself that by controlling everything, he could somehow control the pain, the loneliness that gnawed at him from the inside. Kara sat there, her breath shallow, her mind trying to process the truth of what she had just heard. Ryan wasn't just obsessed with her. No, it went deeper than that. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, a man who had tried so hard to escape his own fears, his own insecurities, that he had become a slave to them. This wasn't about love. It was about fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of losing control, fear of the emptiness that had haunted him for so long. Kara's heart softened, though only slightly. She had been so angry, so consumed by the need to escape, that she had failed to see the complexity of the man in front of her. Ryan wasn't just the villain in her story. He was a man who had been scarred by a lifetime of expectations and control, someone who had never learned how to truly connect with another human being except through domination and control. "I'm not your possession, Ryan," Kara said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "I'm not your project to fix. I need my space, my freedom. I need to find myself again. I need to breathe." Ryan looked down at his hands, his fingers curling into tight fists. For the first time, he didn't try to argue, didn't try to justify his actions. His face was clouded with regret, a deep, profound sadness that seemed to come from the very core of his being. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered, the vulnerability in his voice cutting through the tension. "I've spent my whole life trying to control everything, trying to make the world bend to my will, but I'm scared. I'm scared of losing you, and I don't know how to stop feeling like this." Kara felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She was scared too, but in a different way. She was scared of losing herself in this marriage, scared of losing her sense of identity. And yet, in this moment of honesty, she realized that Ryan's obsession was born from a deep loneliness, from a fear he had never been able to confront. She wanted to hate him for what he had done to her, for how he had trapped her, but instead she saw a man who was just as lost as she was, maybe more. For the first time, Kara saw a glimpse of the man she had once hoped to marry. Not the controlling billionaire, but the broken man who had tried to build walls to protect himself. The realization hit her hard. She wasn't the only one in need of freedom. Ryan needed it too. But the question remained, could they both find it together? Or had their paths diverged so far that they could never find their way back to each other? The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was not just the silence of tension, it was the silence of understanding, of two people standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of what would come next. Kara's heart was torn, but she knew that this moment was the first step toward a different kind of freedom, one that neither of them had expected, but both needed. As time passed, the change in Ryan became evident. The process was slow, and at times the steps forward felt barely noticeable, but it was happening. Ryan began to open up in ways Kara never imagined he could. With her gentle guidance, he started sharing the depths of his past, revealing the insecurities and fears that had once driven him to control everything around him. These were things he had never spoken about to anyone, not even to the people closest to him. For so long, Ryan had hidden behind a wall of power and wealth, convinced that he could shield himself from the world's harsh realities by simply controlling every aspect of it. But as Kara gently prodded him to confront his own demons, he began to realize that true peace wouldn't come from control. It would come from vulnerability and self-awareness. It wasn't an easy journey. There were times when Ryan would retreat into himself, when the pain of his past would resurface and he would shut down completely. But Kara never gave up on him. She knew the man she had seen glimpses of, the one who wasn't defined by his fortune or his need to control, but the one who was capable of true love, deep compassion, and understanding. Even though the progress was often slow, Kara understood that healing wasn't a straight path. It was a winding road full of setbacks and breakthroughs. Together, They dismantled the walls they had both built around themselves. Kara had once been a prisoner of Ryan's obsessive control, but now she was learning to trust him again, to see him not as a cold billionaire, but as a human being with flaws, dreams, and the capacity for change. Ryan, in turn, learned to listen, to let go of his fears, and to embrace the unknown. He was no longer trying to manipulate the situation or bend her to his will. Instead, he was learning what it meant to truly be in a relationship built on mutual respect and trust. Their relationship shifted drastically. What had once been a marriage of obligation, forced by circumstance, evolved into something much deeper. There were no longer any expectations to meet, no demands placed on each other. They spent more time away from the prying eyes of the media, simply being in each other's company. They took long walks in the park, ate quiet dinners at home, and shared the small, intimate moments that had once been lost in the whirlwind of their complex lives. Slowly, they discovered that their bond wasn't built on wealth or manipulation. It was built on understanding, trust, and shared vulnerability. They had come to see each other as equals, not as a powerful CEO and his dutiful wife, but as two people who were learning, growing, and healing together. And then came the moment that would forever define their relationship. The moment when Ryan, with newfound clarity and sincerity, stood before a crowd at a charity gala, holding Kara's hand in front of hundreds of guests. The event was lavish, filled with the usual pomp and circumstance, but Ryan's words were anything but ordinary. "This is the woman who changed my life," Ryan began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I used to think I could control everything. I thought that if I just had enough power, enough money, enough influence, I could protect myself and those around me. But I've learned that real love isn't about control. It's about letting go, about trust, and about understanding each other's hearts. Kara has shown me that. She's shown me how to love without fear, without manipulation, and for that I am forever grateful." As he spoke, Kara felt a surge of warmth and pride fill her chest. The man who had once trapped her in a world of control and obsession was now standing before her, acknowledging the truth. Love was about freedom, vulnerability, and respect. The crowd erupted in applause. But for Kara and Ryan, the approval of others didn't matter. The applause was nice, but it was the truth behind Ryan's words that mattered most. The world had seen the transformation, but Kara knew that the real work had taken place in the quiet moments, behind closed doors where they had shared their fears and dreams, their pain and healing. It was in that moment that they both realized the true power of their relationship. It wasn't the glittering wealth or the titles that defined them. It was the genuine connection they had built. Their bond wasn't based on appearances or societal expectations. It was based on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to grow together no matter how difficult the journey had been. As Ryan looked at Kara, his eyes soft and full of love, she realized how far they had come. They had both been broken in different ways, but they had healed together. They had learned to let go of the things that had held them back: control, fear, and manipulation. In doing so, they had built something stronger than a marriage forced by circumstance. They had built a partnership based on love, understanding, and shared vulnerability. Their story was no longer one of power and control. It was a story of redemption and hope, of two people who had found each other amidst the chaos of their lives. They had learned that true love wasn't about possessing one another. It was about supporting each other's growth and allowing each other to be their true selves. In the end, their story wasn't about a billionaire and a woman forced into a marriage. It was about the power of compassion, the importance of self-awareness, and the transformative nature of love. They had shown the world that even in a society driven by appearances and expectations, real change comes from within. True love could heal even the deepest wounds, And through their journey, they proved that the most important thing was not what others thought, but how they saw and loved each other. Cara and Ryan's love wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its struggles, but it was real, and that was enough. Together, they had overcome the obstacles that once seemed insurmountable, and they had come out stronger, more united than ever before. They had discovered the true meaning of love, not through wealth or control, but through understanding, trust, and the willingness to embrace each other's flaws and strengths. And in the end, that was what mattered the most.